Welcome to today's Prototype Funding Insights. I will talk about the do's and don'ts when you apply for the Prototype Funding program in Hamburg. I'm Dennis Schoubye. I'm the project lead for Gamecity Hamburg, and we are the initiative by the city of Hamburg to support the local games industry. And one of the offers we have to make to game developers in Hamburg and how we can support them is our funding program. I will cover in the first part of today's Insights workshop all the basics about our Hamburg Prototype Funding. So I will cover who is eligible to apply, what are the criteria, what is the funding process until you submit your application. And then in the second part of today's presentation, I will talk about the do's and don'ts when you apply for our funding. Let's get started with an overview of our funding here in Hamburg. So what is the Hamburg Prototype Funding? We can fund in Hamburg startups, developers, and all of this up to small and medium-sized enterprises. So this means our guidelines enable us that we can fund legal persons. So this is important. When you haven't founded your own company, you can also apply for our funding program. So we can fund solo developers, we can also fund group of developers. What is absolutely intended with the funding program and what we have seen in the first two funding rounds is that people who received our funding, developers, that they then found their own company and can bring their own first project to life with the help of our funding. And this goes up until small and medium-sized enterprises. So here we are talking about companies that have less than 250 employees and which haven't a higher turnover per year than 50 million euros. So there's quite a range from solo developers to SMEs, and we can support them with our funding program here in Hamburg. What we do is that we can fund digital games with up to 80,000 euros. And the grant is not repayable. So also later in the process, when you should receive the funding, you have not to pay back the funding. So we want to enable startups to take the first steps and bring their projects to market, but don't have to pay all the investment back at a later stage. So what applicants have to bring when they apply for funding is at least 20% of the eligible costs of the project. So this means when you are aiming for the highest amount of funding, this would be 80,000 euros, then we would be talking about project costs of at least 100,000 euros, because you would have to bring in additional 20,000 euros for the project. But there is no minimum you can ask for. So that's also the case if you have smaller amounts of funding you're going for, then always you have to prove and you have to also bring in the 20% of the total project cost, what you're planning there. And with our funding program, we would like to see marketable prototypes in the end of the funding period. So in our understanding, a marketable prototype should be a prototype that enable the funding recipients to take the next steps. So this marketable prototype should convince publishers, investors, or if you have like other plans, maybe going into the direction of self-publishing, then it should be possible to go into early access or start a Kickstarter or whatever you have in mind with this marketable prototype. So this will be the stage in the end of the funding process. I brought some facts about the first two funding rounds in 2020 and 2021. So we saw in the first two rounds 58 applications in total. And out of those 58 applications, we have been able to fund 13 projects. And these 13 projects got a funding sum in total of more than 680,000 euros. Out of the funded projects in the first round of 2021, there have been 2 projects which for the first time cumulate the Hamburg Prototype Funding with the federal funding for prototypes. So this means that you can go for an additional funding through the Games Förderung. And so this enables companies to develop bigger prototypes. So we are talking more about prototypes that cost maybe 200,000 euros, and this will be then enabled through the accumulation of both funding. So if you have this in mind, then this is something we can give you more details in a consultation appointment. But for now, it's important for you to understand that it's possible to cumulate the 2 funding programs. And in the end of our funding program, an awarding committee out of industry experts decides about the pitches, about the applications, and so ultimately who will get the funding. There are 3 steps to apply for the prototype funding in Hamburg. First one, this is a mandatory consultation appointment. So we will ask you to send us some information prior to this appointment so that we can prepare in the best possible way. So we will ask you for a short project outline. We are talking here about half a page or 1 page, which really summarizes what you have in mind, what project you're going for. Then we will ask you for the aimed amount of funding, and we will ask you to send over questions regarding your project and also questions specifically for what you're up to. Because we have a very extensive FAQ, we have an application info sheet, and you can find lots of information on our website. And so we hope that most of the questions are already covered when it comes to the consultation appointment. So we ask every applicant first to check all the documentation online, and then that we can use our time with the consultation appointment to really get to the interesting parts about your project. Then after the consultation appointment, you would prepare your materials for the application process. So most important one is the pitch deck. So in the pitch deck, you will have everything which the awarding committee should know about your project. And the pitch deck has some things we ask you for to put it in. You will find it in our online application form. So you will find what should be on the first slide. You will find what contents should be on the next slides, but like the structure and the flow or the information, it's really up to you how to present your project in the best possible way. And then there is also the additional project description. Again, we will ask for some contents you have to bring into the additional project description, but at the same time, please understand it as your opportunity to highlight specific USPs or specific advantages of your project. And so you can decide where you're doing like more a deep dive than it's possible in this very short pitch deck. And also very relevant is reference material. So it's often easier to get an understanding what an applicant is up to if there's also some visualization of the first ideas. And so this might be a mood board, this might be a key artwork which summarizes what you have in mind, but it can also be a video or also a first short demo or something like that. And then obviously we would like to know what you are up to with the funding. And so there's the cost and financing plan, and you have like personal resources and other expenses and everything there. And you can check our funding guidelines, what costs are eligible for funding. So please check this before you're setting up the cost and financing plan. And then there's some legal stuff, other documents, from that data protection to something specific to de minimis funding. Everything will be explained in our documentation online, and it's really comes down to some more documents we simply need for the process there. And then when all applications are submitted, then the awarding committee will check all of the applications we received in the funding round. Out of the total amount of applications, there will be a shortlist. And all teams and all projects on the shortlist will be invited to a pitch. So the pitch is not public, it is only the applicants are pitching to the awarding committee. And they will do it with their own pitch deck, and they will present their project in 10 minutes. And most of the time makes sense that you do some tweaks of your pitch deck you already submitted, because in the first place, the pitch deck serves as something the awarding committee only reads themselves. But then in the second part, obviously, you will present it. And so some tweaks make sense here. And then after the presentations, there will be 15 minutes of Q&A. And the awarding committee will ask you about contents of your pitch deck, and also about plans maybe you haven't covered in your presentation, but is interesting for the decision-making process of the awarding committee. Then I already mentioned them. You should be very familiar with our funding guidelines. And in our funding guidelines, you will also find the criteria for funding. So we're looking for projects which covers all of this criteria. And so you have to think about your project, and I'm sure some of the criteria will more be a natural fit to your project and to your team, and others maybe are less fit. But you should have the perspective always, how can I highlight my project in the terms of the funding criteria. So when it comes to promotion of young talent, obviously this meant that we want to support young founders and also startups. But at the same time, if you're an established company in Hamburg, maybe you brought in young talent for a longer time, then also it's a good idea to also bring these details in your application. Then totally relevant is that you take your time to introduce your team and also explain what have you been working on in this constellation already. Or if you haven't worked together, then maybe you have like individual projects you already shipped or you already finished. And so you should really explain who you are. Market potential is also very relevant. And so we will ask you in the application for an exploitation strategy. And basically what you should do is do your market analysis, like you would aim for a specific genre or for a niche you want to bring your game to market, and then do like the strategy from there. So you identified your target group and like where you want your genre and your game to be in, and then the exploitation strategy has to explain how you get there. The location effect is also important because the funding comes from the city of Hamburg, and so we would like you to highlight the location effects. So may it be that the project will create jobs in Hamburg, or it will procure development services in Hamburg. And also, what other effects does it have if you got the funding for your project? Okay, so these have been the basics. Let's go on with the do's and don'ts for your application. And when I'm talking about do's and don'ts, so I mean this specifically for the funding in Hamburg, but maybe you will also find some valuable insights for other funding programs or pitches, but this is especially for the funding in Hamburg. So as I said before, ultimately the awarding committee will take the decision which projects got the grant and which don't. And so it's totally relevant for you to understand who you are pitching to. So let me do a short round of introduction here who will support us for our funding round. So we will have Nina Müller. Nina is the head of publishing at Good Game Studios. Good Game Studios is a big company in Hamburg doing free-to-play games for mobile and online very successfully over several last years. And they're also tapping into the direction of publishing titles. So Nina is very much into how does your strategy look like if you're going for a mobile game, if you're going for a free-to-play game. So it's a crowded market, and you should prove to the awarding committee that you have a marketing plan, that you identified like the niche you're going for in this crowded market. Then there is Valentina Berke. Valentina works at Supercrowd Entertainment, and she is the head of Indie Arena booth. So Indie Arena booth is a showcase for indie games from all over the world. Most recently, there have been the Indie Arena booth online at Gamescom. And what the Indie Arena booth do is that they always have this curation process. So there are more applicants than they have spot on their booth. And so Valentina is very familiar with the actual games which are on the indie side, and also how crowded specific genres are here. Then we have Michael Schade. Michael is the founder of Rockfish Games, and Rockfish Games is developing games for PC and console, and these are top-notch games in terms of graphic and also in terms of gameplay. So we are talking about AA productions here with a team of 20 people out from Hamburg, and he has a history in first founding a company for mobile games, for premium mobile games, and then switching from the whole mobile sector to PC and console. And so he has lots of experience in both parts here. Then we have Jens Unrau. Jens Unrau is from the Ministry of Culture and Media in Hamburg, and he is with the project Gamecity Hamburg since the very beginnings. So the project started already in 2003 to support the industry in Hamburg. And so he has seen a lot of business plans, lots of companies, and has a very good overview also over the market. And then there is me. I'm in the games industry since 10 years. I worked for a lot of startups. I saw a lot of pitches, and also have lots of contacts here talking with publishers and partners out from the games industry, and also have my perspective on the games we see here. So in total, how to convince the awarding committee with your project. So I tried to condense it to 3 questions you should answer in your pitch. First one, do your game hook, your USP stand out of the crowd. I use the term game hook here because from my perspective, it describes very well there has really to be a hook. So what is special about your project? Again, when you release a game, it is a very crowded market. And so what did you identify for your target group? What is really relevant for them? What kind of feature would they like? What kind of art style? What kind of story? What is really your game hook? And then think of the game hook first before you got into the planning of the prototype. Because when you can explain the game hook very early in the stage where you haven't started to develop the game at all, then it's also easier for you at a later part, at a later stage, to pitch your game basically to consumers, because you always know, okay, the most important game hook and why you should keep my game in mind are the following ones. Then the total relevant question, does the awarding committee believe that the team can make the game? So this is also a tricky one, because often it happens that younger teams aiming for a very big scope game, and they cannot really prove that they are aware what maybe production will cost and what the next steps after prototype phase will cost. So always try to plan your game really from start to finish. And then often a good advice would be try to narrow down the scope of the prototype, but also narrow down the scope of the finalized project. Because along the way, it is often the case that money runs short, or that you haven't enough personal resources on the project. So always have in mind, is this something you can make with the resources you have? And can you pitch it in a convincing way? And also, does the team have a realistic exploitation strategy? So you should prove that you know the market, you have done your research, and you are confident with what you are planning there. Yeah, that's basically, this can be a successful product. This is also kind of a tricky one, but try to look at your pitch deck with fresh eyes. So without all the things you have in your head, and you know all the details, and you know what you're planning, you know all the story, you know all the parts the game should have, but is it really in the pitch deck? So really have fresh eyes on what is there in the pitch deck, and also don't get lost in details about like story or whatever. So really, what is important about your project, and then ask the question, if you only see the pitch deck without anything else, would you invest your personal money into this product? All right, as I said, I saw a lot of game pitches, the good ones and the bad ones, and I tried to bring some all-time classics here, what I would recommend for applicants to don't try themselves. So let's start with the don'ts. Don't compare your project with AAA games. This is far too often the case, that applicants have like an argumentation like, okay, and then there is Fortnite, and then there is this shooter, and then there is this action adventure game, and this proves that there is a market for my game. That's doesn't make sense. The argumentation doesn't work. So on so many levels, these are complete other possibilities to reach the audience and complete other products in case. So you cannot compare your game when we talk about prototypes with up to 100,000 euros in terms of the exploitation strategy with AAA games, and also not in terms of sold copies, because you have to keep in mind, if there is a AAA game with millions of budget, then at least 30% is again available for marketing, or at least should be available for marketing for those bigger games. And then you can do the math, how much of marketing money you can spend on your game. And so also don't compare it in terms of graphics, not in terms of scope. And maybe you can name a specific gameplay element out of a AAA game, which you plan to bring in. Maybe you build your game hook around or whatever, but then please be precise and don't simply say, yeah, we're doing things like Zelda. It's more like, what are you aiming for, and what is the bottom line of your comparison here? Try more to identify direct competitors where the teams are comparable to your team size, where the budget might be comparable, and this makes much more sense. Another all-time classic, don't just say after the prototype funding, yeah, and then we are doing a Kickstarter. So this is nothing the awarding committee will look at and say, yes, these guys have a plan, so funding is secured. Because you should have in mind, if you're going for a Kickstarter, you have to bring your own backers. And so it will not be successful if you start from 100 community members on Discord or your social media channels or newsletter. You really have to have a critical amount of people who have already been in touch with your project, which follow your project. And a rule of thumb might be that at least 1,000 Discord members should be there before you're thinking about doing a Kickstarter. Obviously, it depends on the amount of money you would like to get out of this Kickstarter. And also, it's very relevant. You need preparation time for a good Kickstarter. And when I say preparation time, for everything I heard and I talked with companies and developers who did a successful Kickstarter, they are talking about 3 months of a 40-hour week to put in all the preparation and community building. I can recommend you, because we also have our GamesLift incubator program in place here in Hamburg. And so I really recommend that you watch the video with Jan Thijssen. Jan is the CEO and founder of King Art Games, one of the few studios in Germany that really had several successful Kickstarter campaigns. And he shares very valuable insights in this video. So you should check it out on our Gamecity Hamburg YouTube channel if you are planning a Kickstarter yourself. Don't pitch genre standards as USPs. So you should really be proud of what you achieved with your team. If you have like graphics, if you have like specific systems in your game, you should always be proud of what you achieved, but also at the same time, you have to see it in comparison with the direct competitors out there. And this is also the case, what will happen if you're going to market or if you make your project public. It will be compared from the consumers with other games in this genre or other games which consumers think that they are comparable. And so it really don't make sense that you try to pitch genre standards to the committee, but you really have to dig deeper and understand what is really my game hook, what are we doing differently than other projects. And also one example might be if you are going for a narrative-driven game and your pitch is also about your compelling story, then you need some kind of background expertise. Have you worked on projects which show that you're able to do this, or otherwise bring in people who have this expertise in your personal plan. Also for mobile games, really try to understand what would the target group like to see in the product. So sometimes we hear something where applicants are very enthusiastic about, and there will be every day new levels for my game and so on, but it doesn't feel that the target group is asking for that. So always have in mind what is relevant for the target group, what are the competitors in your field are doing, what proves to work good and what doesn't. This one is not really about the pitch, but we will also ask you in the application for your milestones for the prototype development. And so if you identified your game hook, you should really think about what is the stuff we have to prototype to show this game hook in action. So what is really special about our game? And this will be different for different projects. So some of you might aim for vertical slice because they needed to show story parts, gameplay parts, and whatever is important for the final product. But for others, it might be that they only do specific gameplay features, because you should have in mind the next step after prototype funding should be that you can reach out to potential partners and investors, and then they will look at it. And if you do like the core of your game right, then they will believe that you also can do like the basic stuff. And basic stuff, I mean something like inventory system or dialogue system or whatever. They will believe that you can do that when the thing you show them has their interest, and they really can see, okay, I understand what this game is about. So don't lose yourself again in details and to fine-tune elements, but really, where's the fun in your game? Try to identify that, and what do you need to show it to externals. Yeah, and also I would recommend to not only ask friends and family for feedback for your pitch. So maybe they might be biased in their feedback, and also maybe they don't have the overview what's like genre standards, what is the competition out there. So I would recommend that you identify industry peers, or maybe you also going to meetups, or in this case also you can come to our Gamecity Hamburg Discord server, because lots of contacts in the games industry are happy to help and to also give feedback. You simply have to reach out to them and ask. So these were the don'ts, but also I would like to give you some tips what you should do for your application. So the do's. We really saw some applications where it was like, my name is X and I'm a programmer, and there is also somebody doing the graphic, and this is our story, and the story is so interesting, and then these are our USPs. So really take your time to introduce your team properly, because it comes always to what is the project? Is this project worth making? And can the team make it? So we would like to get to know you. Who are you? Do your team cover all aspects from making a game to market a game? So this would be the best case, that you really have this talent inside your team already. And also, very important, do this combination of people have already been successfully working on products? Maybe you already shipped games, or you already finalized projects together in this constellation. And it's also totally relevant, did you had like game jams together, and after game jams you published games here? And also, when I'm talking about team, this also applies for solo developers. So you should identify what are your strengths, but also think about, okay, what are my weak points? And maybe you can compensate weak points because then you can think of who will you bring in to the team for this project. And then you can also allocate money here for personal resources that will support you for your project. Then I would always recommend that you refer to the funding criteria. So really take your time, which parts of what we're up to, what we are planning, contributes to one of these criteria. And then also highlight it in a proper way. Market analysis is challenging, but it's so super important. So you really have to understand where in this crowded market is the place where you can reach consumers, what you're making there, where's your niche, and what is the direct competition. And there are many resources available for free. So if you're aiming to release the game on Steam, then really like the tip of the iceberg would be the Game Discover CO newsletter by Simon Carlis. So what he's doing there is that he always covers a lot of topics around Steam, data analysis, also lots of indie developers sharing their data so that you can do like a proper forecast for specific genres or for comparable projects. And then there's also things like a sheet where you can change like your numbers and then do a forecast how many copies might be realistic to sell if I have so many wish list entries on Steam, etc. So really, this is my tip to check that. Then also Steam itself, you can search for comparable games. You should check how many reviews do they have, what are the people rate as a good thing in the game, what is rated negatively, and then also how many reviews received a game. And then there are also these models where you can take the number of reviews and then try to estimate how many copies have been sold there. If you're using some of this formula, it's important that you have a disclaimer in the additional project description, that we simply know, okay, how do you come up with these numbers you're sharing in the market analysis. And then there are lots of GDC talks, so the game developer conference talks, and lots of insights there, postmortems, and also all over YouTube you will find quite an offer to get insights here for different kind of topics. And then there's also one big resource. It has been called Gamma Sutra for a long time, and for good reasons, as they changed the name recently to gamedeveloper.com. Also, my advice, simply go there, use the search functionality, and deep dive into how to do a proper market analysis. Also, an important advice, know your challenges and also don't shy back to name them in your pitch and in your application. Because every project will have challenges, and there isn't a project where everybody say, yes, I totally see it there, nothing can go wrong. So you should convince the awarding committee that you know what challenges are there, and also outline, okay, I already know how to tackle them. And then when you refer to comparable projects in your market analysis, then you also should not only cover the projects and games out there which are super successful. So don't choose 10 other projects and say like, yeah, all of these projects have sold 1 million copies. And so, yeah, I'm estimating we will sell 500,000 copies, but more say like, okay, there are these very good performers which might be comparable to my project, but also there are these games who didn't have lots of sales or have bad reviews. But what will you do differently? So what do you learn out of these projects which obviously haven't been successful? And then also know your scope. So what elements are essential for your marketable prototype? And is it realistic with the time and money you can spend to prepare everything and to get everything together for this marketing prototype? And also, as I said earlier, always have in mind, what do you estimate with the production cost? And also, what kind of team size would it need to go into production? So last one here from the do's, you should really know your terms, because in the moment you put something in the pitch deck, the awarding committee will have some comparable projects or some specific ideas in mind. So what I mean is only a short selection. Are you talking about a free-to-play or a freemium game? So there's other approaches to marketing, to game design, and there's simply a difference between the two models in monetization. And then, are you referring to AAA games or to AA games? And again, always a tricky thing to refer to these kind of big budget productions. And last one here, are you pitching a roguelike or a roguelite? This is also something you should have in mind. Yeah. So these have been the do's I wanted to share with you. And I hope this will enable you and help you to prepare your application for the funding in Hamburg. Okay, then let's come to the end. Where can I apply for the Hamburg Prototype Funding? So first up will be our website, gamecity-hamburg.de/funding. You will find all information here and all documentation, all FAQ, and we really have extensive information here available. And then I also recommend that you join our Gamecity Hamburg Discord server. And this is really a place where you can meet recipients who already received the funding, and also the game developer community in Hamburg. And you will always find people that are happy to help and also to give feedback for your application and your pitches. So thank you very much if you have watched until this point, and I'm happy to answer also your personal questions regarding our funding program in Hamburg. please reach out to us if you're planning to apply, and then let's talk soon. Thank you and bye-bye.